tardes a todas y a todos. Good afternoon, everyone. Mi nombre es Lee Wong Medina, soy el cónsul adscrito del Consulado de México en Tucson. Y a nombre de nuestro cónsul titular, Rafael Barceló, es para mí un gusto dar estas palabras de bienvenida a una ponencia excelente que tenemos el orgullo de presentar esta tarde. Esta conferencia virtual es posible gracias a la colaboración de la Oficina de la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México, aquí en Tucson, que cumple su 5º año consecutivo de operación, y a la Universidad de Arizona, que como veremos en unos momentos, nos regala a uno de los estudiosos de México más destacados y prestigiosos aquí en los Estados Unidos. La conferencia es titulada Eventos y Hombres, casi olvidados, ganaron la Independencia de México hace 200 años. Y les invito a que la disfrutemos no solo por su calidad sustantiva, sino también por lo que representa. Es un símbolo del excelente entendimiento entre Arizona y México y, por supuesto, entre la UNAM y la Universidad de Arizona. Así es que, sin más, cedo la palabra a la doctora Elena Centeno, directora del Centro de Estudios Mexicanos aquí en Tucson. Doctora.
Muchas gracias, cónsul Wong. Muchas gracias a todo el personal del consulado por su apoyo para poder hacer posible esta transmisión de esta conferencia tan interesante. Y nuevamente agradecemos a la Universidad de Arizona, especialmente al doctor William Beezley por compartir todo su conocimiento con nosotros el día de hoy. Y bueno, la conferencia va a ser dada en inglés, por lo tanto voy a leer la biografía del doctor Beezley en inglés también, para empezar a entrar a tono. William Beezley is a professor of Latin American history at the University of Arizona. He has taught at SUNY, the University of Nebraska, University of North Carolina, University of Texas, University of Calgary, University of British Columbia, and la Universidad de Colima and the Guadalajara Summer School. He served as a Fulbright Senior Specialist at la Universidad Nacional in Bogotá, Colombia, and as a Distinguished Visiting Professor at the Colegio de México, and as a Distinguished Researcher at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, UNAM. For 16 years, he directed the Oaxaca, Mexico Graduate Summer Institute. He has appeared as a guest expert in over 20 PBS episodes of The Desert Speaks and In the Americas with David Jedman. Currently, he and Rod Camp are filming interviews with former Mexican presidents and prominent men and women for a video production on the democratization of Mexico. His immediate video research focuses on embroidery as the voice of Mexican women who express their domestic, civic, and human rights and explain the impact of migration in their lives. In recognition of Professor Beezley's contribution to knowledge of the nation's history and culture, the Mexican government awarded him the Oatley Medal in May of 2017, confirming his international reputation. His founding editor-in-chief of the Latin America History Section of Oxford Research to knowledge of the nation's Professor Beezley, is always a honor to have you. The Mexican government us and to hear about what really happened with the independence of Mexico. Thank you very much.
I'm honored to have this opportunity to discuss the bicentennial of Mexican independence in 1821. For this honor, I have a number of people I must thank before we begin. First, I have to thank the Mexican Council in Tucson, the Honorable Rafael Barceló, and Consul Lee Wong, also at the consulate here in Tucson. The director of the UNAM office in Tucson, Doctora Elena Centeno, my good friend and a prominent internationally known geologist that I hope we will hear from sometime soon. I also have to thank the UNAM-Tucson Associate Director and our host today, Dr. Arnoldo Bautista, and the organizer and director of Mexican initiatives at the University of Arizona, Dr. Luis Coronado, who could not be with us today. I'm going to share my screen and I hope you will see some remarkable images. There we go. Yes. So the title of my talk today is Almost Forgotten Men and Events When Independence for Mexico 200 years ago. Mexico is celebrating the bicentennial of the victory for independence, and we need to at least take cognizance. We need to at least think about who the men and women were who achieved that 200 years ago. On September 27th, 1821, rebel troops entered and occupied Mexico City to complete the struggle for national independence. Here we see the patriots marching into Mexico City with a famous Arc of Victory in downtown Mexico City. Mexico's campaign for independence from Spain was initiated on the night of September 15th, 1810. We all know that and celebrate it. It's the time when Padre Miguel Hidalgo called on the parishioners in the village of Dolores, now Dolores Hidalgo, Guanajuato, to defeat the Spaniards. And here's a classic image of Padre Hidalgo and the Grito de Dolores to initiate the campaign for independence. Allende, for whom the town of Allende is named today, was one of these prominent early patriots, and Josefa Ortiz de Dominguez, who in Mexico City acted as a spy, acted as a spy and provided information to the patriots that helped them during the first 2 years of their struggle. After Hidalgo, Allende, and additional patriots were captured and executed, others continued the struggle for independence and are known also to all Mexicans. These patriots included Padre Jose Maria Morelos, shown in this image, who often wore a red headscarf around his head and was perhaps the most successful military officer, even though a priest, successful military officer, and organized an independent Mexico stretching across much of the central of the country from 1812 to 1815. Two other early patriots that deserve recognition were Ignacio Guerrero, shown here, Guadalupe Posada, whose birth name, Jose Miguel Ramon Aducto Fernandez y Felix, is another of these early prominent leaders of importance. This is in the period from 1810 to 1815. And we should note here that these two men, Guerrero and Victoria, were Mexico's first and second presidents of the Mexican Republic. Moreover, Guadalupe Victoria, by adopting this patriotic name, demonstrated the close ties between the independent republic and the Roman Catholic Church, and how Catholicism provided context for politics of the new nation. In addition, Guerrero, let's go back to him for a second. Guerrero was the first Afro-Mexican president And this was ignored for many years, his racial and ethnic background, but it demonstrates early on how Mexicans had a response to the need for diversity within their nation. And he offered that to Afro-Mexicans, just as Benito Juarez would later do for indigenous Mexicans in the mid-19th century. As important as all of these patriotic leaders were, none of them, through their contributions, created the new nation of Mexico. None of them created independent Mexico. None of them is being celebrated in 2021 for the bicentennial of Mexican independence. The man who was most important for achieving independence was the nearly forgotten, or at least almost always overlooked, Agustin de Iturbide. Iturbide was an army officer, a general, and a politician. He was born in Morelia, Michoacan. His father was from a prominent family of the Basque gentry, and his father was deeply involved in Basque trade and commercial activities with Mexico and through Mexico into the Philippines. He represents a critical aspect of late colonial, early national commercial activity in Mexico in the hands of Basque families that we should recognize. And his mother was the daughter of a powerful, wealthy Criollo family in Michoacan who held a number of haciendas and also had mining activities. Consequently, Agustin had powerful political, social, and economic connections throughout the colony, throughout New Spain, and for this reason, when the struggle for independence began, Agustin fought against the Patriots and against the idea of independence for Mexico. For the first 6 years of the struggle, 1810 to 1816, Iturbide was one of the harshest generals opposed to the Patriots. And he very quickly developed a reputation for his personal corruption, scooping off money from military budgets, and for cruelty against the Patriots. On Good Friday in 1815, Iturbide ordered the execution of 300 Patriot prisoners. In addition, he ordered the arrest of 200 females, the wives, mothers, daughters, girlfriends of Patriots. He ordered their arrest and had them placed in the homes of Criollo families in Michoacan and other places, and had them work as maids and other almost slave-like occupants in those homes. His actions against the rebels became so notorious that in 1816, Iturbide was relieved of his command by the viceroy. A year later, through his family and political connections, who brought pressure on the viceroy, Iturbide was reinstated, but he adopted a different view privately of the Spanish and the idea of independence of New Spain. We have learned recently, it's hard to imagine we didn't know this, but we have learned in the last 20 years through discovered correspondence that Iturbide carried on an exchange of letters with Ignacio Guerrero from 1816 to 1820. And these two men discussed the possibility of Mexican independence and of collaboration in making that happen. Iturbide and Guerrero eventually built a successful political and military coalition that would gain the independence of Mexico. The independence struggle and the eventual victory resulted from Iturbide's alliance with Guerrero, but took place within the context of international events. Padre Hidalgo initiated the struggle for independence in response to European events. In particular, Iturbide and early patriots reacted to the creation of Napoleon's empire and Napoleon's arrest of the Spanish king, Ferdinand VII. Napoleon ordered the invasion of Spain, and once it was more or less successful, he placed his brother, Joseph, on the Spanish throne. Spaniards in Spain and in New Spain fought against this French-controlled Spanish kingdom. And in the struggle for independence was in many ways a response to French control of Spain. In particular, those who opposed Napoleon and his brother created the Constitution of Cadiz, or the Constitution of 1812. This statement, in opposition to the French, attempted to create a Spanish Commonwealth and a constitutional monarchy with strong liberal enlightened origins. So there's a three-way competition taking place here. The French trying to stay in power in Spain, the Spaniards who want a new Spanish Commonwealth, and then the patriots who want an independent Mexico free of Spain. This was the international context in which these things took place. The situation changed dramatically in 1815 when a coalition led by the British defeated Napoleon's army and, among other things, restored Ferdinand VII to power. Here I have to say, at least those of you in the United States will recognize what kind of severe punishment this was. King Joseph, Ferdinand's brother, was removed from the throne of Spain and sent into exile in New Jersey. Think of that. Living in New Jersey for the rest of your life as a punishment. Baffling. In addition, King Ferdinand immediately rejected the Constitution of 1812, the Constitution of Cadiz, and determined to restore his authority in Spain without restraints and throughout his colonial empire. He planned to send Spanish reinforcements to the New World, both to New Spain and to South America, to snuff out campaigns for independence. And it's in that situation, as so often happens in history, events had unexpected consequences. And the unexpected consequences were the actions of the Spanish general Rafael Riego. Rafael Riego was in charge of an expedition in Cadiz that was supposed to go to South America and was supposed to defeat the patriots there, while other troops were going to go to New Spain and discuss and defeat the patriots there. Instead, Riego launched a revolt, seized control, and forced Ferdinand to accept the Constitution of 1812 with its liberal requirements. This led to a new movement, a new stage, a new place in the movement for independence. The Constitution made the king a constitutional monarch, limited with the parliament, regulated the activities of the Catholic Church in Spain and the colonies, and established equality of elites in Spain and the colonies in the fashion of a commonwealth. The immediate result was that Agustin Iturbide became an advocate of independence and wrote a plan that called for Mexican independence with 3 guarantees. These 3 guarantees, liberty, religion, and equality or union, were also called the Plan of Iguala. Once Iturbide had this plan, he reached an agreement with his rebel correspondent, Ignacio Guerrero, and that is identified as the embrace of Acatempan. This is a famous painting of the agreement between Iturbide and Guerrero. And together, this new combination successfully defeated Spanish troops, entered Mexico City, and proclaimed independence on September 27th, 1821. Independence came with 3 guarantees. Today, these 3 guarantees sound quite liberal, quite on the left, quite something we could all live with. But in reality, when we look at Iturbide's 3 guarantees, they are indeed quite conservative and not what one would expect. Liberty. Liberty called for the independence of New Spain, but it carried with it the idea that Ferdinand VII would come to Mexico and be the new king of Mexico. Or, if Ferdinand VII would not come, that his brother Carlos would come and be the king of Mexico. Or, if Carlos didn't come, some other European monarch would come to be the king of Mexico. This shows how misguided Iturbide and many of his Mexican colleagues were, to think that a European king was going to come and become a monarch of an independent Mexico. Still, this idea of a Mexican monarch survived into the 1860s and only ended with the execution of the Emperor Maximiliano. Religion. Many people would guess that religion, as one of the guarantees, meant the freedom of religion, that there would be opportunities for people to participate however they wanted to in religious activities. That was not the case. The idea was that the new constitution of the new republic, of the new nation, would have only one religion. Only the Roman Catholic Church would be permitted in Mexico, no other religions. And this, in fact, for many years became the rule. Equality. Again, today, because we in the 21st century, we tend to think about equality in terms of widespread diversity, widespread opportunities for people to participate in society. But in fact, equality, according to Iturbide and Guerrero, involved only the equality of Spaniards who happened to be in Mexico and Spaniards who were born in Mexico. Spaniards born in Mexico were known as criollos. They would be equal. Below them would be a social hierarchy of mestizos, Indios, Afro-Mexicans, and other groups. So equality was very, very limited. What provides an additional character that could only happen in Mexico because of its wonderful way that the history of the nation always surprises everyone who studies it, was that since no European kings, no European royalty would come to be the king of the New Mexico, Iturbide arranged to have himself named the first emperor of Mexico. And as the emperor of Mexico, Iturbide ruled for 10 months in that position. He managed to create a government. He managed to obtain foreign loans to pay some of Mexico's major debts. That money eventually came from France. He also secured diplomatic recognition of Mexican independence from Great Britain and the United States. And here, at least again, as a kind of unusual anecdote, we have to recognize that the U.S. minister who came to Mexico was Joel Poinsett from South Carolina. He did not enjoy being in Mexico, but when he returned, he took back to South Carolina and the United States various botanical specimens that he promoted in the United States. And one of these, out of his modesty, he named for himself. He named the plant the Mexican Christmas flower. He named the poinsettia. And this, of course, is prominent throughout the United States. And everyone has a poinsettia with their Christmas tree. And it's a tribute to Mexico, even though it bears the name of this grouchy South Carolinian who was there. A rebellion after 10 months forced Iturbide to resign. And he gave up the title of emperor, and he went into exile in March of 1823. He was supposed to go to Italy and stay there with the promise of 25,000 pesos per year as long as he stayed there. The agreement also said that if Iturbide ever returned to Mexico, he would be arrested and executed. In 1827, Iturbide learned that the Spanish were planning to invade Mexico, so he rushed back to warn the Mexicans and to prepare a defense. When he arrived back in Mexico, he was captured and executed according to the agreement that he had signed. His memory since 1827 has faded. And in many ways, the memory of his family has also faded, although they pop up in strange and odd ways. The French supported Emperor Maximilian and his wife Carlota could not have children. And so when they were on the throne of Mexico in 1865, they adopted the grandson of Iturbide to be the heir to the Mexican throne. Later, this same son, grandson of Iturbide, was educated and a member of Porfirio Diaz's family throughout that regime. He was the same age as Porfirio, one of Porfirio's sons, and they went on together. The wife of Iturbide and members of the family moved to Baltimore in the United States, where for many generations they taught Spanish to people of Maryland who wanted to do business with Mexico. Iturbide, a man with certain events who is responsible for Mexican independence 200 years ago. And the whole process of achieving this independence created 4 developments that became patterns over the next 200 years of Mexican independence. These 4 patterns are, first, that the major political changes in Mexican history since independence, beginning with independence, have come from the provinces. Iturbide was from Michoacan. If we look at the reform, the revolution, the presidential change in 2000, the initiative of those major political changes have come from the provinces. Second, a second critical pattern is that individuals who have directed Mexico's major political changes have also come from outside the national capital. Iturbide from Michoacan, Santana from Veracruz, Juarez from Oaxaca, Madero from Coahuila, Cárdenas from Guanajuato, and Fox in 2000 from Guanajuato as well. Still, we have to also see that the major events that have taken place in Mexico have taken place within an international context that doesn't cause what happened in Mexico, but is related to it. The Riego Rebellion, the French invasion, the US-Mexican War, US President Wilson's program for Latin America, US Good Neighbor policy are all part of the context in which major Mexican events have occurred. Finally, we have to recognize that for major political changes, for major political success, whether they take place in an international context, whether they're motivated by individuals from the provinces, whether the movements come from the provinces, Success means, as Iturbide knew, the occupation of the national capital. And that's still the case today. And so we celebrate September 27th, 1821. Today we celebrate that as 200 years of the achievement of Mexico as an independent nation and its history since that time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was just a wonderful, wonderful conference. For the public, if you want to post your questions on the Facebook, and we will receive them. So while people are posting their questions, let me tell you that Marisol Vindiola is saying greetings from Beezley, Tucson. And also Kelly Castro is saying, ay, el pobre en New Jersey. Gracias, Bill Beezley, por siempre incluir lo personal y lo humano en su trabajo. And Guillermo Ibarra says, saludos. So we're waiting to see if there are any questions or comments coming. And in the meantime, I have a question. When and why Iturbide was so put into the darkness of history? Why is such a character that is not remembered as one of the key characters in the independence of Mexico? Just because he tried to be an emperor, or why?
I think a major factor is that the person who helped to get him into exile, who helped to change Mexico to a republic, was Antonio López de Santana. And Antonio López de Santana is such a charismatic, such a prominent individual who had such a following that I think he overshadowed in many ways Iturbide. Plus, you know, Iturbide was very much involved with Iturbide's success. I think he worried more about Iturbide than about Mexico. So I think that's the other reason.
Let me see if there is any questions coming from the public. No questions so far.
Okay, I think we should tell them if they don't ask their questions right away, we're going to start charging $1.
Yeah.
And before you know it, they'll have to pay.
Yeah, let's see.
If I may, I would like to ask a question real quick.
Sure.
Easily. You just narrated spectacularly and in a nutshell, a very long period in which different factions, different people with different thinking of what being free meant in still the Viceroyalty of New Spain before becoming Mexico. So my question is, throughout those years, was there any tension, any intellectual tension or debate like the one we saw, for example, in the French Revolution or in the American War of Independence as to whether to have a monarch or to have a president, whether to have a parliament or to have a Congress? I think that you just touched the surface of that when you explained what religion in the three guarantees meant. It was not freedom of religion as we would understand it in the United States, but rather it was an appeal to the majority of the Catholic population in Mexico. So is there any debate throughout those years as to what type of government Mexico would want?
Absolutely. And I think that one of the ways Mexico is shortchanged during this period is that there is a very important, crucial debate that takes place not only in Mexico, but in Cadiz with the Congress of people who were there in 1812 talking about the new Constitution. This is a very lively, very explosive, they didn't actually explode anything, but very prominent way of trying to settle these crucial issues. And there's debate between Allende, Hidalgo, and the other members of the first patriotic groups about what kind of nation, once they achieve it, should it be. I have to say that it's remarkable that the Constitution of 1812, the Constitution of Cadiz, of which about 15 Mexicans were involved in the writing of that as delegates, that Constitution became the model used for the Greek Republic later, and several other major liberal constitutions, including the Italian Constitution in the 1880s, are based on the Constitution of 1812, the Constitution of Cadiz, in which Mexican intellectuals and politicians played a major role. And as I said, that gets overlooked too often at how powerful and important these political thinkers were.
Thank you. There is Luis ECG, congratulations for the great lecture. And there is a question from Jorge Zavala. He says, hi, Dr. Beezley. It was nice to listen to your talk. How do you interpret that Mexico has been a highly centralized country, considering that these reformers have been overall from the provinces, from the states?
Well, I think that Mexico has not been that highly centralized. It appears that it has been, but not always that centralized, and certainly not through the first half century. Today, yes, there's much greater centralization. But it was not that highly centralized. And some of the early leaders, Valentin Gomez Farias, Antonio Santana, these groups, these individuals supported more of a regional rather than a centralized authority. So I think that it's a mistake probably imposed by textbook writers in the United States who didn't really know how widely dispersed Mexican political views were. You certainly don't get that impression looking at the textbooks of Mexican writers of the time.
Thank you. That was a question from Liliana Toledano. And there is another question from Luis. Hi, Dr. Beezley. It was nice to listen to your talk. How do you interpret that Mexico has been a highly, the one about the highly centralized is a question from Luis. And a question from Liliana Toledano, which is a good question, is, I have a question for Dr. Beezley. Beyond official history, are there groups with an alternative narrative about the independence of Mexico that value the contribution of the people who achieved the independence of Mexico? That's from Liliana.
See, Liliana knows that I'm going to be asking her comp questions soon, and so she's keeps starting this out. And I'm going to ask that same question on her comprehensive, I think. Yes, I think so. I think that the movement for independence from 1815 to 1821 really is shaped by communities, by regional groups, and eventually either Beezley succeeds and carries it out, but the movement for independence from 1815 to 1821 only survived because of the community groups who were trying to obtain opportunities for themselves, equality for themselves, a good life for themselves. And so I think Liliana is absolutely right. For half of the struggle, it's popular organizations, popular masses that keeps this struggle for independence alive. You like that answer?
Yeah, that's a very good one. So, well, it looks like we don't have any more questions coming in.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, let me see if there is anyone. No more questions. Yeah, we're going to start charging them 1 peso per minute if they don't ask any questions.
Exactly. Well, I'm going to be asking questions about geology when that talk comes up. We know that.
Thank you.
Perhaps if I may present a follow-up questions.
Sure.
Professor, could you tell us a little bit about where was the indigenous population at the moment of independence? And the question comes from the fact that during the Habsburg dynasty, it seemed that the indigenous people would have their rights and their land respected in what was a clear stratification, a social stratification that virtually replicated that of noble Europe, of the nobility in Europe. Throughout the time and throughout the passage of the centuries, everyone mingled with each other, and it was very difficult to have track or to keep track of who was whom or who pertained to which category in the viceroyalty. So it seemed that when the independence came, that somehow got into conflict with 2 ideas. The first one was that everyone was equal just for being an individual, but at the same time that the dominating classes wanted to keep that stratification somehow without necessarily continuing this categorization that existed in the viceroyalty. So could you tell us a little bit about where was the indigenous population in all of this?
Well, this is really an important question and a critical question in the early part of the Republic as Mexicans tried to sort out what their nation was biologically as an ethnicity. And so basically, the decision about ethnicity and where the indigenous population fit fell into the hands of the church. And so it's the church who is making those kinds of decisions because as each child was born, a priest would record that the child's name, but also the ethnicity. And so the priest would decide, often with the parents, but often not. And the priest would say, this is an Indio, this is a mestizo, whatever it happened to be. So community church leaders were most important in deciding ethnicity and how they all fit together. The other important factor that takes place is that the movement of individuals moving from one place to another. When they arrived in Puebla, when they arrived in Mexico City, when they arrived in the far north, wherever they were going, they often decided what they were and who they were. So, you know, they could say, I'm a mestizo, or if it fit the way things were going for them, they would become an Indio. Individuals created their own identities, and it just made sense not for no one else to ask too many questions about that. Just, oh, okay, so you're an Indio, that's good, or you're a mestizo from Puebla, well, okay. And that's what would happen. And so that gets very confusing, especially in northern regions where people don't know. You know, so now everybody in New Mexico loves blue corn tortillas, but those blue corn tortillas were brought probably from Tlaxcala, and they were brought by people who said they were mestizos, or in some cases, criollos, or in some cases, Spaniards when they get to Santa Fe, New Mexico. So I'm a Spaniard. I wanted to get out of Mexico because of independence. So it's a complicated and extremely interesting question to try and sort out.
Thank you. We have one more last question.
Okay.
That is also from Liliana Toledano. You are here on an exam. What sources would you recommend to use to write a history of the independence period from the perspective of people from below?
Well, because of the kind of historian I am, I'm a believer in the approach of Luis González y González from the Colegio de México y Microhistoria. So I would look at community histories, community sources for this period to get the micro history of the movement of independence. That would be one thing. The other thing, and I'm surprised, she'll be disappointed if I don't say this, is the music. Because there are songs from the period, there are songs that sing about the folklore of different areas and the legends of different areas. And those provide really important sources of information. And third, I would look at accounts of the so-called bandits, especially on the highway from Veracruz to Mexico City through Puebla. So there were supposed to be bandits all through there, but in many cases, they were groups that were fighting for independence, and there's stories and legends about them, and those have been collected in local archives. And so I would look for those. I would look at those.
Thank you, Dr. Beezley. There are still bandits in the same length of the road, but very different ones today.
Oh.
I think we are coming up, running out of time, and this was just a wonderful chat with you. And I want to thank all the audience for being with us today. I want to thank the Consulado de México in Tucson for organizing this event. Thank you very much. It was very nice to be with you celebrating the 5th anniversary of UNAM-Tucson. And remember that we keep having interesting and exciting conferences and events, workshops, and so on. So just keep an eye on our website and also the Facebook of the Consulate, because they also help us to promote our activities. I want to thank again William Beezley for this wonderful conversation, this wonderful talk. We always learn something about even our own country when we listen to you. Thank you very much. And thanks to the University of Arizona for all the collaborations that we keep ongoing. That's wonderful to work with all of you. Thank you, Consul Wong Medina, for being with us, and welcome to Tucson. This is one of the first public events that you are having. So you are very welcome, and I hope you enjoy being with us. Thank you.
It's a privilege joining you all.
Saludos a todos. Adiós.
Thank you.